You know that moment. It arrives quietly, like a cloud sliding across the sun. 1 minute her voice is warm, laced with subtle music, and her gaze seems to reach right into yours. The next, there's a faint chill. Her answers grow shorter, her eyes start to wander, and the current between you feels disrupted. If you've experienced this, you've also felt the reflexive question forming in your mind: what did I do wrong? You replay the last sentence you spoke, the shift in your tone, the angle of your smile, searching for the glitch that caused her warmth to fade. And the more you search, the more the ground under your feet seems unstable. What most men never recognize in this moment is that it's not just an emotional accident, it's a form of measurement. A woman's sudden coolness is not always punishment, it's often a calibration. Consciously or unconsciously, she is weighing your stability. She is observing whether your sense of self is something you carry within, or something that evaporates without her approval. The man who panics at the first sign of frost shows her exactly where his fire comes from, and that it isn't self-sustaining. Stoicism teaches that the highest form of strength lies in ruling the inner citadel. Your emotions, your frame, your value, they must be guarded from the winds of external opinion. This is why on Stoic Loading, we emphasize that composure is not just a dating skill but a life skill. Seneca himself wrote that the greatest freedom is to be immune to fortune's changes, and the same principle applies here. The change in her tone is simply another test of your sovereignty. When the warmth cools, the instinct for many men is immediate repair. He leans in closer, laughs louder, offers more validation, tries to resurrect the energy as though it's his job to keep it alive. This reaction, though well-meaning, reveals the opposite of strength. It shows dependency. It broadcasts that his emotional thermostat is set by her, and that without her approval, he loses center. And here's the harsh truth: the moment she senses that her mood can dictate your confidence, the attraction begins to erode. Nietzsche described human interaction as a subtle dance of power, not in the sense of domination, but in the sense of determining whose reality will set the frame. In romance, this means one person's state becomes the gravitational center, and the other orbits around it. If you allow her coldness to pull you into chasing, you place yourself in orbit around her emotional sun. If you remain steady, you quietly communicate that you have your own orbit, one she can join, but never control. The power here is stillness. Let her tone shift. Let the gap open. Continue at your own rhythm. Redirect attention to something else in the environment, or engage others if you're in a social setting. Show through your calmness that her withdrawal does not trigger a scramble for re-entry. This isn't arrogance, it's mastery. It's the embodiment of Marcus Aurelius's reminder: if it's endurable, endure it. Stop complaining. When she sees that her test, and yes, many times it is a test, doesn't shake you, her perception begins to change. What was initially coldness becomes curiosity. Why didn't he react? Turns into what kind of man stays unmoved. That curiosity is magnetic because it hints at depth, at an internal source of value she cannot manufacture or withdraw. And paradoxically, the very moment she realizes she cannot control your state is often the moment she starts wanting to be the source of your joy again. On Stoic Loading, we call this the reversal effect. By refusing to chase warmth, you create the conditions for it to return. You are not withholding affection, you are simply refusing to make her approval the oxygen you breathe. You show that your fire burns whether or not she's adding wood to it. And that, my friend, is the beginning of true, unshakable attraction. The social gathering test. Picture this: you're at a lively evening event. The lighting is warm, the background hum of conversation and clinking glasses creates a comfortable rhythm, and you've found yourself in a corner with her, the woman whose energy had been bright, playful, even leaning toward you with subtle signs of interest. The conversation is alive. She's smiling, her shoulders angled toward you, and there's that spark in her eyes that makes time slow down. Then, without warning, the shift happens. She leans back slightly. Her gaze scans the room as if catching sight of someone else. Her tone flattens, her laughter softens, and you sense a wall forming between you. This is where most men trip, not because the change is catastrophic, but because it taps into something ancient and instinctive. In our evolutionary past, belonging to the group was survival. To be excluded or ignored was to be vulnerable, alone, and in danger. The sudden cooling from a woman you're connecting with can feel like that exile in miniature. Your mind starts racing. What did I say? How do I get her back? And if you're not aware, those thoughts push you into overdrive, more jokes, more compliments, more questions, all in the hope of reigniting what's fading. But here's the hidden truth: her withdrawal is often not about you making a mistake. It's about her seeing how you behave when the energy isn't in your favor. This is what I call the gathering test. In that moment, she isn't necessarily deciding whether to leave, she's gathering information. She wants to see if you are the type of man whose center of gravity shifts at the first drop in temperature. The weak response here is predictably human: chase the warmth. But chasing is submission in disguise. It tells her, you have the power to set my emotional weather. And once she sees that, the mystery of you dissolves. There's no longer a question about whether you are stable without her input, she knows you are not. On Stoic Loading, we emphasize that your presence in any interaction should never be a performance for approval. A man anchored in himself can weather a pause, a wandering gaze, or a cooler tone without flinching. That's because his sense of worth is not hooked into her reactions. The power move here is to let the moment breathe. Don't lean in, lean back mentally. Keep your voice steady, your body relaxed. Maybe you turn slightly to observe the crowd with her. Maybe you bring up a topic unrelated to the moment. Maybe you simply let a comfortable silence exist. The key is that your pace doesn't change. Nietzsche spoke of the sovereign individual, one who commands himself fully, whose value is not assigned from the outside. In this scenario, you demonstrate sovereignty by not chasing her attention the moment it wavers. You remain the same man she was drawn to moments ago, showing her that connection is welcome but never required for you to be complete. What happens next is almost always the same. The absence of reaction creates space for her to re-engage on her own terms. She realizes she isn't being pulled into a tug-of-war for energy. She feels the subtle weight of wanting your focus again, and this time, it's her reaching back for connection. This reversal happens because you passed the test without even naming it. And this is the first real step toward becoming what we call, on Stoic Loading, an unmoved mover, the one who sets the tone without forcing it, the one who remains grounded whether the room is hot or cold. The digital disconnection test. The second battlefield isn't physical, it's digital. In our time, much of courtship happens through the screen. Texts, DMs, voice notes, little exchanges that keep the connection alive between meetings. In the early phase, these can feel electric. She's quick to reply, her words carry energy, maybe even playfulness. She sends you little hooks to keep the conversation flowing, a meme here, a teasing remark there. Then, it happens. The tempo slows. Hours pass before she responds. Her sentences shrink from full, colorful messages to a simple LOL or yeah. Emojis vanish. The current that once felt warm is suddenly tepid. And before you know it, you're staring at your phone, wondering what changed. This is where most men fail in the same way they do in person. They rush to fill the gap. They send another message before she's replied to the first. They try humor, flattery, even subtle complaints about her absence. They mistake activity for influence, believing that if they just send the right thing, she'll come back to the way it was. But what she's watching for here is not the perfect reply. It's your rhythm. Do you collapse without her attention? Does your communication speed up to chase hers? Does your mood dip when she doesn't mirror your energy? The digital disconnection is a test of your independence disguised as silence. In Stoic terms, this is where the discipline of apatheia comes in, the state of being undisturbed by what you can't control. You can't control her response time. You can't control her tone. You can only control your own output and the emotional weight you give to her behavior. On Stoic Loading, we call this message sovereignty, never letting another person dictate the pace or energy of your communication. The weak response signals dependency. It tells her, you are the source of my conversational energy. And once that's clear, the mystery fades. She knows exactly how to affect your state, simply by withdrawing attention. The power response, on the other hand, is simple but rare. You keep your tempo. If her replies slow, yours remain on your own schedule. Not out of pettiness, but because your life is full. You respond when it makes sense for you, not when anxiety tells you to. You resist the urge to stack messages. You let the conversation breathe, even if that means a day passes without a word. Nietzsche's idea of the will to power fits perfectly here. It's not about controlling others, it's about controlling the self so completely that others can't pull you into reactive patterns. By staying in your rhythm, you show that your mental state isn't tethered to hers. What happens in most cases is predictable but still surprising. She notices the absence of pursuit. At first, she may rationalize it, he must be busy. But as the pattern holds, she begins to wonder, does he even miss me? That question shifts the dynamic entirely. She starts sending longer messages again, maybe replying faster, maybe tossing in a joke or a question to pull you in. Without confrontation, without games, you've inverted the power flow. She's now the one seeking re-entry into your focus. On Stoic Loading, we remind our viewers that the point here isn't to win by making her chase, it's to remain unshaken so that the connection is based on mutual interest, not dependency. Digital coldness is only dangerous if you panic. If you hold steady, it becomes an opportunity for her to see that your attention is a gift, not a given. The in-person date coldness test. There is a certain kind of silence that weighs heavier than any insult. You can feel it sitting across from her at a restaurant, or walking side by side in a park. The earlier part of the date may have been light, even flirtatious, laughter, comfortable eye contact, small touches that seem to happen naturally. And then, without warning, a shift. She leans back in her chair instead of forward. Her answers shorten. Her gaze wanders, not just to the menu or the scenery, but into a space that seems far away from you. Most men make the same mistake here, they overcompensate. They speak faster, tell bigger stories, reach for topics that might reignite her interest. They might even joke at their own expense to loosen the mood. But here's the harsh truth. She isn't just experiencing a random change in energy. Often, she's watching how you handle being placed in an unbalanced position. In Stoic philosophy, this is the arena of constancy, the ability to remain composed when the ground beneath you shifts. A woman's sudden coolness during a date is less about her disinterest in that moment, and more about her need to see what you do when warmth is removed. Are you a man who wilts under the absence of approval? Or are you one who can hold your center, unaffected by emotional tides? This is not about ignoring her, nor about confronting her with, what's wrong? Which usually turns the moment into a pressure point. Instead, it's about detaching your emotional posture from hers. If she withdraws, you don't chase. You maintain the same calm demeanor you had before the shift. You keep your voice steady, your body language open but relaxed. You engage with the environment as if her mood hasn't trapped you in a test chamber. This is where subtlety matters. A man who visibly tries to win her back in that moment signals that her approval is his anchor. A man who remains centered sends a very different signal, that his mood is self-governed. On Stoic Loading, we call this emotional non-reactivity, the art of making it clear that you do not rise and fall based on another person's temperature. Nietzsche once wrote that the highest form of love is to love fate, amor fati. In a date setting, this means embracing the reality of her mood without needing it to change for you to remain whole. Paradoxically, when you stop trying to drag her back into lightness, you often find she returns there on her own. The absence of chase becomes an invitation for her to re-engage on her terms, which is always more powerful than forced participation. And here's the deeper truth. When a woman sees that her withdrawal doesn't destabilize you, she understands that you are not a man who clings. You are a man who chooses. And that choice is valuable precisely because it is not driven by fear of loss. The public setting coldness test. There's a unique discomfort in watching her warmth fade, not in private where only you can see it, but in a room full of people. It could be a gathering of friends, a family dinner, or even just a night out with mutual acquaintances. At first, she laughs at your remarks, meets your gaze often, maybe even touches your arm in passing. But then, the air shifts. She turns her body slightly away when others join the conversation. She engages more with them than with you. And when you speak, she responds with polite brevity instead of the earlier sparkle. This is not an accident. In public, a woman may run a more subtle version of the coldness test, one that examines how you handle social contrast, her warmth toward others versus her sudden detachment from you. The unspoken question is, will you crumble under the appearance of being sidelined? Most men in this scenario make one of two mistakes. Some withdraw completely, their pride wounded, choosing silence to avoid further embarrassment. Others go the opposite route, attempting to reassert themselves in the group by talking louder, telling bigger jokes, or subtly trying to pull her back into their orbit. Both reactions miss the point. In Stoic practice, this is where the discipline of prohairesis, your power of choice, becomes the compass. You cannot control her behavior in that moment, but you have full control over your interpretation and response. If you see her public withdrawal as an attack on your status, you'll act defensively. But if you see it as a stage to demonstrate poise under shifting conditions, you will pass the test without playing into it. The key is to hold your frame without becoming either cold or clingy. You stay socially engaged, not to prove anything, but because your presence in the room does not depend on her validation. You talk with others, contribute to the flow of conversation, laugh naturally when something is funny, and enjoy yourself without performing for her. This does two things. It shows that you are socially self-sufficient, and it removes any hint of desperation from your energy. On Stoic Loading, we call this public composure, the ability to maintain your inner gravity no matter how the social winds shift. A man who panics when a woman appears distant in public is showing that his social confidence is conditional. A man who remains at ease demonstrates that his value in the group is independent, and that any warmth between him and her is a choice, not a lifeline. The paradox? When you don't chase in public, you often find her circling back to you on her own. The absence of need creates space for curiosity. And in the eyes of others, your unshaken demeanor earns quiet respect, the kind that is noticed more than it is spoken of. Because in the end, the real audience of these tests isn't just her. It's also you. You're watching yourself to see if you truly embody the man you claim to be when no one's looking, and especially when everyone is. The aftermath silence. There's a particular type of coldness that doesn't erupt in the middle of the argument, it arrives afterward, quietly, like fog rolling in after the storm. The disagreement is over, the voices are no longer raised, and yet, the air between you feels heavier than before. She doesn't slam doors, she doesn't yell, but she withholds something far more destabilizing, her warmth. This is the post-conflict coldness test. It's less about the disagreement itself and more about observing what you do with the tension that lingers. In these moments, she is measuring not your debating skills, but your capacity to coexist with discomfort without trying to force it away. Most men respond with urgency. They feel an almost physical itch to fix things immediately. To make her laugh, to over-explain their point, to demand that she talk about it now. On the surface, this might look like an attempt at reconciliation, but underneath, it's often an inability to sit with unresolved tension. To her, it reads as weakness, as if your peace depends on her emotional state, and you can't breathe until she restores it. The Stoic answer here is counterintuitive: allow the silence to breathe. Not as punishment, not as manipulation, but as a quiet acknowledgement that not all emotional weather clears instantly. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If it is endurable, then endure it. If it is not, then stop complaining." Enduring her temporary withdrawal is not about playing games, It's about demonstrating that your emotional stability is not up for negotiation. In practice, this means you don't withdraw in revenge, nor do you hover in desperation. You stay present, calmly going about your business, speaking when it's natural, and giving her the space to process in her own rhythm. You do not push for a resolution on your timetable. You understand that pressure, even when dressed as care, often backfires, making her retreat further. On Stoic Loading, we call this the steady flame, your ability to remain consistent in warmth and composure even when hers flickers. You're not trying to win the Cold War. You're simply refusing to let the weather outside extinguish the fire inside. And here's the paradox she often doesn't expect: the moment she realizes you aren't chasing, performing, or begging for normalcy, she's drawn back in, not because you forced her, but because the stillness of your presence gives her a place to return to. You pass this test not by talking her out of her mood, but by living as if you trust that it will pass. And more often than not, it does, faster than if you had tried to wrestle it into resolution. The random withdrawal test. Sometimes, the coldness comes with no warning, no argument, no obvious trigger, just a sudden emotional distance that feels like a door closing softly but firmly. This is the random withdrawal test, where she steps back not out of calculation but out of instinct, confusion, or fear. Here, your challenge is radical patience. It's not about decoding or fixing but about steady presence without pressure. You don't chase the mystery, you accept it, maintaining your inner balance while giving her the space to find her way back on her own. This is the crucible of emotional sovereignty, where your calm becomes the anchor amid shifting tides. The vulnerability freeze. At times, coldness is a shield, raised to protect a deep wound or insecurity. When she reveals a painful truth or vulnerability and then immediately retreats into silence, it's a defense mechanism, fear of being judged or rejected. The right response isn't to demand openness but to offer unwavering acceptance and safety. You embody the Übermensch ideal by holding space for her pain without flinching, showing strength through empathy rather than dominance. This quiet acceptance builds a foundation for profound trust and intimacy. The subtle power shift. Coldness often serves as a test of hierarchy, an unconscious measure of who leads. When she withdraws warmth, she's seeing if you'll crumble or stand firm, if you'll chase or hold your ground. On Stoic Loading, we emphasize the power of non-reactivity as a leadership tool. True authority is shown not through control but through unwavering self-possession. Master this, and you don't just survive her tests, you become the standard she measures herself against. The dance of fire and frost. The interplay between warmth and coldness is not a battlefield but a dance. Understanding this transforms tension into rhythm. By embodying consistent internal fire, you create an emotional climate where her coldness loses its edge and instead sparks desire. This dance requires patience, confidence, and the wisdom to lead without forcing. On Stoic Loading, we teach how to turn her frost into fuel for connection. Communication as power. Your words, timing, and tone become tools to reinforce your sovereignty. Speaking calmly and intentionally, especially in moments of withdrawal, conveys strength. Avoid reactive texts or emotional pleas. Instead, practice measured silence and deliberate engagement that signals your internal abundance. Language becomes an extension of your will to power. The role of indifference. Indifference, properly understood, is not coldness or cruelty but a profound freedom. It means your value doesn't depend on external validation. By embodying this, you paradoxically invite deeper connection because you signal that your approval is a prize, not a given. On Stoic Loading, we redefine indifference as the gateway to irresistible attraction. Mastering your emotional climate. You are the governor of your internal world. No withdrawal, silence, or cold glance from her can alter your sense of self unless you allow it. Developing emotional resilience through breathing techniques, mental reframing, and focused presence is essential. This mastery is the foundation of all your responses to coldness. Practical exercises for unshakable composure. Practice pauses in conversation without rushing to fill them. Maintain steady eye contact without desperation. Control your breathing to remain calm. Set boundaries around your communication rhythm. Each of these practices builds your Stoic loading strength, making your presence magnetic and immovable. The ultimate transformation. When you embody these principles, coldness stops being a threat. Instead, it becomes a forge where your character is refined. You shift from the man who chases approval to the man whose very presence commands respect and desire. This transformation is the essence of the Übermensch, the self-mastered, self-defined individual. On Stoic Loading, this is not just philosophy, it's the blueprint for real power in relationships and in life.